I know some of you, but not all of you. I'm Mark Bernstein. I'm the growth consultant with the Central East Regional Group. And my home congregation is the UU Church of Delaware County, which is in Media, Pennsylvania, which is right outside Philadelphia. I was born and raised on Long Island, about 15 minutes away from here, so it's always like homecoming when I come back here. And my responsibility really is, thank you, is to serve as many congregations as I can of the 200 that are in our region. And I know I've worked with, or either the whole congregation or with some of you, either in person or virtually. So I've got a bunch of stuff to share with you, and again, it'll all be, I'll keep moving so I won't be in your way. It'll be up on a PowerPoint, and I'll send you the PowerPoint sometime next week, so you'll have that. I don't have handouts. I do have a handout of an exercise that I'm going to ask you to do a little later. So if you want to take notes, that's fine, but know that the PowerPoint will be coming your way. And then again, assuming we can make sense of what we talk about today, it'll be on-demand webinar as well. So I've never done this before. I've never done this topic before. I've done a lot of topics, both in person and virtually. But my background is in the field of disabilities. I started working for the UUA about 4 years ago. Before that, for 100 years before that, I was working as a direct support staff, an administrator, a consultant in the field of disabilities. And I had my own business where I provided staff training to people who work with people in the field of disabilities. So I did a lot of management and supervision training and conflict resolution and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, I was talking with Andrew about a possible topic, and I thought, well, what about the basics of leadership for our congregations? It's something that I've been thinking about, but never really, put a lot of thought into it. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to go and how this resonates with you. So here's what really got me started thinking about this. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a congregation and someone has said to me something like, I'm president of the board, my term is up in 2 months, pause, thank God. Right? Or stuff like that. Or, I joined the board of directors, nobody else wanted it. And, we put ourselves down because we're serving in a leadership position. I'm not just talking about the board. And I thought there's something wrong with that. We should be congratulating people when they join the board of trustees, or head up a membership committee or a committee on ministry. And we should be thanking them for doing it, and then when they leave, we should really be thanking them for having served the congregation. Instead, it seems like a cross that people have to bear, and that's not right. So I thought about that, and I thought maybe it's because we're not really approaching leadership in the right way in our congregations. Maybe we're not talking enough about what it means to be a leader. Maybe we're not preparing people enough to be leaders, and maybe we're not identifying the people that are leaders that we're just missing. So all of that kind of went into what I'm going to present to you today. So I'm going to start off by asking you the musical question, what is leadership? It's not a trick question. Actually, let me show you first what we're going to do today. Whoops. This is going to look like a lot, but don't worry, 3:45, we are out of here. So we're going to start with some principles of leadership. It won't take very long, but just some basic definitions. What is leadership from some of the experts? Although I want to hear from you first. And then we'll talk about how do you identify a leader? What do you look for in identifying a leader? And again, I'm going back to Norm's comment about being a follower. We almost interchange the terms leader and maybe not follower, but participant. If somebody steps up and serves the congregation, we immediately brand them a leader. And not all of them may be leaders. So we need to be really careful about when we call someone a leader, what are we referring to? What are the qualities that we're looking for? So we'll talk about ways to identify a leader, and then I'm going to ask you, and I'll offer some ideas of my own. Why is it so hard to find leaders in our congregations? At General Assembly in Louisville, I did a workshop on volunteerism, which also is available on the on-demand site. And it was really well received. And then I saw, again, as I started thinking about this, I thought, not only do we have a difficulty getting people to step up and help out the congregation, but it's even harder to get people to take leadership positions. I'll do that, but I don't want to be the chair. I hear that all the time. I'll serve on the committee, but I don't want to be the chair. It's like, here's being on the committee, everything's nice and safe. And here's being a chair. It's like another world, and like people get so anxious and they get scared of that. Again, I think it's because we're not really talking about what it means to be a leader, or we're not finding the right people to take those positions. So we'll talk about why is it so hard to find leaders in our congregations, and then we'll talk about where do you find leaders in your congregation. What does it take to be a leader? And I came up with 8 qualities, I think, of a leader. I just picked 8 because I ran out of ideas after 8. 9 was kind of lame, so I decided to stay with 8. And then there's 2 that I want to focus on as we get towards the end of our time, and actually have you engage in some exercises around this. One is the ability to listen well, which I think is the most important quality that a leader can have. This is 100 years of doing staff training. I am absolutely convinced the most important quality that a leader can have is the ability to listen well. And then the most important skill is the ability to listen well. The most important quality is the ability to instill trust in the people that you lead. And I've got some really cool exercises around both of those. And then at the end, I want to talk about what are you going to take away from this, and what are some of your ideas on how you can take some of these strategies and the things we talk about and make them work in your congregation. And it might be, and what I'm advocating for in congregations is to have a leadership training program, a formal leadership training program. You don't. If you attend, it doesn't mean you have to be a leader. But let's talk about what leadership is, and maybe people will discover that they are a leader. Okay? So a lot of this stuff I'm going to be working at as through you, and how you respond to this stuff. You with me, okay, Rachel? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let me ask the question now. What is the definition of leadership? You don't have to come up with like a complete sentence. But when you think of leadership in our congregations, not what are the qualities, what is the definition of leadership in your congregation?
You mean the reality of it?
I'm sorry?
You mean the reality of what we have existing now?
No, just what's the definition? What is the definition of leadership for you in your congregation? Susan?
I think it's someone willing to assume the preponderance of responsibility for the functioning of the group.
Sure, give me a really big word to
Yeah, I know.
Assume preponderance.
Most responsibility.
Too bad I've already started.
Not necessarily.
That sounds heavy.
Assume the preponderance of
Responsibility for
responsibility.
the group, for the functioning of the group.
That's why I don't want to chair the committee.
Exactly.
I don't want to assume the preponderance.
So now I'm not chair.
You're not. What do you
I
mean?
heard that and I said, so now I don't want to chair anymore.
Oh, you don't want to?
I get the preponderance.
All right. Well, in that case, my job is done here. Thank you all for.
Good work, right, Mom? Thanks.
You're right.
I think that that's maybe the common idea of leadership, but it's not my definition of leadership.
Yeah.
For me, leadership, this comes from my mother actually, leadership is, the leader is the one who delegates the responsibility.
Interesting. And I actually am going to, some of the stuff we'll talk about later, but that's really interesting.
It's not about actually holding the responsibility yourself, but about figuring out how to delegate it to everybody else on the committee.
That's really interesting. This is a really, we could spend the rest of our time together just debating this.
Yeah, yes.
Because look at the difference here. I need you, Rachel, I need you to be a leader because we need someone who's going to take on the bulk of this stuff. Not that I'm saying that's not wrong, Susan, but versus we need someone who has the skill of delegating and empowering other people in the congregation to share in the work. Norm!
really, the buck stops here. Who is they that doing it? You may delegate, but the buck stops here.
Are you saying that's a definition of leadership? That,
Well, that's the results of true leadership anyway.
okay, I'm just gonna put it down that way, because I don't know how to paraphrase that. But, so for you, the definition is, I may delegate, I may empower, but final responsibility and accountability rests with me as the leader. And,
In identifying a leader, I think I would like to look for someone who has a passion and a commitment to the well-being of the community, of the congregation, and has an understanding of where that community wishes to go, and can understand why it's not happening that way, and have some ideas about how to get in front of those people within the community who are suggesting another way.
did you sneak in here during Pat's address and look at the PowerPoint presentation? I have to cut out about 20% of what I was gonna talk about now, because you already covered it. So, passion and well-being of the congregation, and also understands where it's going and why it's not getting there.
By listening well.
Yeah.
You just covered the remaining.
Okay, that's great. So, committed to the mission and the well-being of the congregation, understands where the congregation is going, and is able to identify why it's not getting there. Oh, that's really good stuff. Rachel!
Having some kind of vision, I think, like having an idea, whether it's
So a leader is someone with vision.
someone who has an idea, who can see beyond just what we're doing right now. Kind of going on like why we're not getting where we want to be. Kind of
Okay. This is all great stuff, but I get, well, I'm gonna wait, I'll ask this question after we hear from everyone. Selena? And then Randy, it's Randy, right?
Yeah,
You've been waiting. Selena, could you hold on for a
of
second?
course I can.
You're not gonna give me a bad evaluation?
Not at all.
No, I'm just gonna add to Mariah's. In addition to delegating responsibilities, I was gonna say someone that's going to take control of a given project and then delegating responsibilities.
What do you think about that, Mariah? So taking the lead, not to be
Right.
redundant, but, so taking control, maybe setting the vision, this all starts to blend together, setting the parameters, making the responsibilities clear, and then going out to the congregation and saying, hey, here it is, who wants to step in line first to help? Good. So Selena and then Andrea?
I believe that a leader is a trusted servant that guides the congregation.
A trusted servant, you guys have taken my entire curriculum and told me,
We have a similar experience.
a trusted servant. That's one of the definitions of leadership.
That guides the congregation.
Yeah, one of the things I want to explore with you is later, are leaders made or are they born? Is there such a thing as a born leader? I mean, we'll talk about that, but that's really interesting stuff, because it helps us to start to look at people in the congregation, look at those who may be willing to stand up and become a leader, but also looking at those that aren't and asking why aren't they? Andrea, right?
I think a leader should be a good facilitator, keeping things on track.
Okay, so a leader is also someone who has the skill to facilitate, keep people on track. By the way, you probably can't read this, because I can't, if I were to write this legibly, we'd be here till about 8 o'clock tonight, so. Couple more? Yeah, Chris
I
and
would
then
like to
Siobhan.
say that a leader is someone who understands that they're not the boss.
You're not the boss. What do you
They're
mean?
not the boss.
Well, then why be a leader?
Well,
Michelle is absolutely, that was.
you did a little dance over there when you said, I don't want to be the chair. Well, there's a lot of people who don't want to be the boss. because they think that that will somehow antagonize other people, and that perhaps they'll be taken, and people will think differently of them. But
So
the truth of the matter is, a good leader should understand they're not the boss, they're simply the facilitator, or the delegator, or they understand the role that they're playing is to nurture people along and to be able to, quiet the passionate, aggressive committee member while nurturing the mouse in the corner. In other words,
Yeah,
that's
that's
the leader.
that's the art of facilitation.
Exactly.
So a leader doesn't think that they're the boss. That's your definition.
They should not think that
Right.
they're the boss.
Okay, interesting. There's no right or wrong answers here. And look at the diversity. Siobhan and then Susan, and then we gotta move on.
Well, I think a leader needs to be an expert problem solver. Because
Oh.
I used to be the secretary, and it's a totally different area of problem solving now that I'm vice president. So, and a lot of problems come our way. And you have to be expedient in it. You can't drag it, it has to be solved.
So an expert problem solver, someone with the ability to make appropriate decisions, depending on the situation. We'll talk a little bit about that too. Susan, we're actually coming full circle.
Right. Having been in leadership positions in a large congregation, I was in this congregation for 25 years, and now being in a small congregation,
Right.
I have to say the quality of leadership is very different depending
so?
on your resources. Like even in delegation, which I agree with is the function of a leader. If you have 12 people on a committee to do the work, that's one thing. If you have 4, and as the leader you don't want to burn them out, you tend to take on more for yourself. That's part of the job.
Yeah.
You go into it knowing that. So I do think that the resources available to you can create a very different leadership style.
That's a really good point. And we're really looking at 112 versus how many members?
About 1,600.
1,600.
Oh my goodness.
So the definition, Mariah's congregation could have yours for lunch.
Yes.
So the definition of a leader may be different depending on the size of the congregation. One of the things I hope that you'll take back and have conversations with the other leaders, because it's a conversation that needs to happen. In our congregation, how do we define leadership? And it may vary. I've got some opinions on what I think is a good leader and not a good leader. But I don't know that we sit down in our congregations and have those kinds of conversations. So it's like, it's hit or miss. It's, someone assumes a board position or the head of a committee and they bring their own personality in, or they bring their background in, or they bring their baggage in, and that's the kind of leader that they become, but it may not be the kind of leader the congregation wants. So look at this list of stuff, if you can read any of this. If someone were to walk in here right now and read all this stuff, they would never volunteer to be a leader. I'm serious. And I know it's a compilation of your ideas, but holy mackerel, look how daunting this is. I think one of the things we need to do, really, and I'm not suggesting I can do this, is to really look at these kinds of things in your congregation and decide what are the priorities. And to have conversations with other leaders and communicate that to the congregation. Here's what we're looking for in a leader. Here are the kinds of things that we expect you to do if you step up to a leadership position. And the more we can define it, the better chance that someone will step up and say, you know what, I can do that. You define the parameters for me. I think I can do that. Some might need encouragement or training or support or mentoring. But we first have to be clear on what we're expecting from leaders. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll be asking that a lot because I have no idea if it does or not. It does in my twisted mind. But okay.
Job description.
What's that, Norm?
Clarity of job description.
Yeah, we talk about job descriptions for all the roles in the congregation. Not all congregations have them, but it's a good idea. But we don't have an overall understanding or a job description of what a leader is. Okay, so, here's three definitions of leadership from three of the big management gurus. So this is Peter Drucker, who said, the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. Now, Peter Drucker probably made a lot of money in his career, and he certainly didn't make it off comments like that. A leader is someone who has followers.
Actually,
John Maxwell, who is a management guru, who I've read a lot of his stuff, and I use a lot of his stuff in my management supervision training, said simply, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It's influence. It's the ability, the willingness to influence another person, in this case, another person in your congregation. So you don't have to be the chair of a committee or be on the board in order to be a leader in your congregation. I think the problem in our congregations is not that we don't have enough volunteers, it's we don't have enough leaders. But with this definition, not leaders like a preponderance of the, I'm going to pick on you the rest of the time. You realize that. Not a leader like some of those things, but someone who has the ability to influence another person should be recognized as a leader in the congregation. And if I can, geez, if I'm asked, you know what, we need someone to clean out the utility shed in the back of the building, could you grab a couple of people and do that? And I say, yeah, I can clean out a building. So Mary Jane and Rachel, will you help me? Can we take a couple hours and clean out the building? I've now influenced two other people and accomplished a specific task. I've taken on leadership qualities. And then the congregation can start to nurture that. So I'm not saying that you get someone to clean out the utility shed with the ulterior motive of getting them to be president of the board. But you don't start with, we need someone to head up the membership committee. Let's go find someone to head up the membership committee. Because they're not going to just appear out of thin air. Here's a little more detailed definition. Warren Bennis, another guru. Leadership is a function of knowing yourself, having a vision, which was already shared, that is well communicated, building trust among colleagues, and we'll talk a bit about trust, and taking effective action to realize your own leadership potential. So it is quality laden, being a leader. And then this is my definition of leadership, and this is what I used when I did the supervisory leadership training. I call it who leadership, not that kind of who. We lead not by virtue of our title or position, but by virtue of who we are and what we stand for. So leadership is not defined by our title, president of the board, board member, head of the membership committee, big mahaf of the auction. Who's the service auction person? Big auction mahaf. That's not what defines us as leaders. What defines us is who we are and what we stand for. It's our principles, it's our qualities, it's who we are. It's very much in line with Unitarian Universalism in our first principle. And I actually came up with this definition long before I started working for the UUA. I was a UU, so it probably influenced me. The idea behind this is that anybody in the congregation can become a leader. And not just because they take a formal position. So again, if we can start recognizing people who step up and do something because it's what's right or because it's consistent with their UU values, we need to lift that up. We need to recognize it, we need to praise it, we need to publicize it, we need to reinforce it so that the person will be more willing to step up again. And then maybe eventually willing to step up and assume a preponderance of responsibilities or take on some of these other qualities. Okay, so those are the definitions of leadership. So here are some of the ways I think to identify a leader if you're out there searching for leaders. One, most leaders have evidence of leadership in the past. Now, I'll tell you now, I teased you with this, but I don't think that leaders are born. I mean, disagree with me if you want. I don't think it's innate. I think that we experience things in our lives that require us to assume leadership positions or leadership roles. And then we
Okay,
continue to
and
play that.
Some people have greater potential for leadership than others though, and they have a different way of developing it in their experiences.
So you think that part of it
Some
is
have more
innate?
potential than others.
Okay. I'm willing to accept that. But that's the last time you disagree with me.
Well, partially agree.
You might. I mean, I think there are some of us are, no, I can't argue with that. I think it is nature and nurture. I think that some of us are more predisposed to take on leadership responsibilities. But I think that primarily leaders are made, not born. But there is, for the people that do take leadership roles, there usually is some evidence of leadership in the past. So, when I was a kid, growing up on Long Island, I was fascinated with the movies. I always wanted to be an actor and a director and stuff. And I would write movie scripts, which were pretty much like stealing from like Jerry Lewis movies and stuff. And then I would get my friends to act in the movies, and we would like do plays for our parents. My friends didn't want to, but I kind of cajoled them into acting, which is why I was not a very popular kid. But I realized years later that that was demonstration of leadership abilities that I had forgotten about. That I really was demonstrating leadership at an early age. And then I did become a latent leader. I kind of went underground, and then eventually I started my own business, started training, and found those qualities again. So all of you are leaders in your congregations, and there's probably evidence of leadership in the past. It doesn't just all of a sudden come out when you join your congregation. Well, that's a major problem. I mean, we have leaders in our congregations that have identity problems, that don't feel confident, that don't feel that they belong in that role. And you know what? Don't take this personally, and especially don't put anything negative on the evaluation. But if you don't think you belong on that horse, if you think you look funny, then you're probably not as good a leader as you can be. You may have the qualities.
Here.
Oh, okay. Sure, put it on me.
Straight to all my
So, Emerson has a capacity to create vision, that already enjoys the thrill of the challenge. Isn't that interesting? Like it or not, maybe not all of you, certainly not Michelle. But most of you are in the positions you're in because it's a challenge, and you wanted to take on the challenge. And even though it might be hard work, although it shouldn't be hard work, if you're not having fun, you shouldn't be doing it. There's a thrill in that, in moving up and taking on that responsibility. Demonstrates a constructive spirit of discontent, not somebody who bitches all the time, but someone who says, we can be doing this better.
I can do that.
There you go. That's one. Actually, if you just meet 3 of these criteria, Michelle, you're a leader. Offers practical ideas. So they may be looking at the vision, but they have their feet planted firmly on the ground. They understand the reality of the congregation, and they offer ideas that are practical and real. Takes responsibility and risk, and we'll talk about vulnerability later. Is mentally tough. It's not easy being a leader. It really isn't. You are a target for people who are discontent, people who would really like to take that role but are too afraid to, so they envy you because you've taken it, and they don't know how to deal with that, so they give you a hard time. So it's not easy, especially if you're now leading people that before were your peers, other members, and now you're taking a leadership role. We'll talk about boundaries too. Enjoys the respect of peers, so leaders don't fly alone. They enjoy being with other leaders, and they enjoy getting that positive reinforcement from other leaders in the congregation. And they have a quality that makes people listen, and we'll do a couple of exercises around that. So these are 10 ways to identify a promising person, in this case a leader.
So we're looking for number 10, obviously.
Where's number 10?
Oh, that's right, there's only 9. Number 10 is challenges the status quo. So leaders don't just accept things at face value. Wait a minute, this doesn't quite make sense to me. Let's look into this some more. So those are some of the characteristics of leaders. So let me ask you to do one more thing, and then we'll take that break. So you already know that there's an afternoon. Here's what I'd like you to ponder. Why aren't there more leaders in our congregations? Why is it so hard to find leaders? We've touched on this already. Randy and then Sean.
People are too busy with other things. Whether they have kids.
Other things in the congregation or other things?
Outside,
In
too.
life.
They have to take their kids to sports, or they just don't wanna do it, they don't wanna get involved.
Okay. People are too busy. Siobhan?
Oh, I think it's going back to what Ann said, that they don't really feel like they're leaders. You know, they're very uncomfortable, you know, taking on that position.
Okay.
and taking
So
on that role.
ambiguity in the role, or they don't
Absolutely.
feel, like
Yeah.
Ann said, they don't feel they have qualities,
Exactly, yeah.
or they're not able to exhibit those qualities even though they
They don't feel
have them.
comfortable, they don't feel safe.
Okay. No?
The challenge of having time. I know that, at least in the past, a lot of the leaders were recently retired people who had time to do this stuff.
Right.
And that, the problem with that is, I hope they retire young enough so they're not too old. From the idea of then, where do you get the time and energy for younger people to be able to be leaders? How do you build that into the system?
But remember, and these are really good questions, but these are the questions we could ask about why can't we get enough volunteers? I'm not talking about volunteers, I'm talking about leaders, which is a different animal. Rachel, and then Mariah.
I think sometimes you touched on this, kind of the culture of our congregation, seeing leadership as something that's like, oh, nobody wants to do that, or like, who's the poor person who has to chair the committee? Instead of seeing it as something that is really an honor to do, or something that people really do appreciate, and that people are so thankful for. Also, the culture, like, you know, of when things aren't going right, blaming the leader, and like, you know, and so when you hear people complaining about the people in leadership, you're like, I don't want to do that, everyone's gonna have a problem with me, like, you know, so I feel like there's kind of a widespread culture.
You get a sticker on your name tag. I should have brought stickers. I'll come back to that one. That's a great point. Mariah?
I think two things that we've touched on already. One is that I'm being allergic to responsibility.
No, I said authority.
Authority, right, that's what I
Big
meant.
difference.
Allergic to authority and resistant to authority and angry at authority and just like you use in my experience lots of problems with authority.
Yeah.
And the herding cats thing that kind of goes hand in hand. Like
Oh, they're very.
who wants, first of all, if you resent authority, why would you want to have it? And why would you want to lead a group of people who've demonstrated that they resent authority?
It kind of goes back of it to Rachel's, the culture of that, yeah. I mean, we're not, you know, there's nothing in the principles or in our sources that said, we will disobey authority. I mean, it's not required in our congregations, but it becomes part of the culture.
Fred Muir, the minister from Annapolis, wrote in, I think it was in The World,
John.
the challenge between individualism, our first principle,
Yep.
and the collective community. And there's a big struggle within our movement, I think, with that. Maybe
Yeah.
other movements, but certainly within ours.
Absolutely.
Individualism and community.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of congregational polity, congregations can do whatever they want. Some people may look at that, well, I'm not gonna lead a congregation that can do whatever it wants. You know, I'm gonna be challenged every step of the way.
Those cats.
Celine, I'll let you have the last word on this.
Okay. One of the
I mean, it can be more than one word.
Okay. One of the challenges that we've had is people, that there are members that are very confrontational and kind of, you know, they come with their own agenda. They're not really
Sure.
there to look at the congregation as a whole and to look at how can we move the congregation forward.
Right.
Now, before I was on the board, I served on a membership committee whose purpose it is to look for potential candidates to be on the board. And there was
Isn't that a fun job?
It was.
It's one of the hardest jobs in our congregation. Yeah.
And one of the things that we had to do
Nominating
is,
committee.
though there were people that might have the quality of being a leader, they also had that quality of being too overbearing
Yeah.
and too confrontational.
Sure.
So it was like, no matter what you said, it's black, they always said white,
Yeah.
no matter what you said.
You're talking about leaders that are confrontational or members that confront leaders or both?
People that we saw as potential
I
leaders
see, who become
too confrontational.
the too powerful.
Which is why, you know, one of the reasons that it's so hard for us to find leaders,
Right.
is because even the people that have that potential and that have that quality, they have.
We'll talk more about this next after the break. We'll talk about where you find leaders. That's a really good point. Ann, real quick?
Real quick, I think my observation in my own community is that there's a lack of intimacy, and it's not that kind of intimacy. It's
I
a
know
kind
what
of
you mean.
Intimacy of truly knowing and understanding the other.
Yeah.
And being willing to have the other know and understand you. And somehow in our culture, in our community's culture, this is not really happening to my satisfaction.
Yeah.
Maybe other people may be feeling it,
Yeah.
but I'm not feeling it.
Yeah. Isn't it
And I don't
interesting?
know why, and I think it's a cultural issue.
Yeah, again, going back to the culture. And isn't it interesting how deep we need to go to understand why people aren't taking leadership roles? And we're getting to the lack of intimacy between members in our congregations.
That's why we can't
This is
find
interesting.
leaders.
Yeah,
Why would you want a leader who you don't even know?
right. Well, all of the ideas you just shared are absolutely true. I'm not arguing with them. But all of them, except for the ones that have to do with culture, blame the individual. Too busy, not confident enough, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's the environment. I think it's the internal environment. I think it's the environment that goes into the congregation. That's the main reason why it's so hard to find leaders. Cultures where the norm is, we can't find anyone to serve on the board. We need someone to serve on the board. I was a member of my congregation for 8 months, and someone came to me and asked if I would be Yeah, it's crazy. Or I've only got a couple of months left of my term, thank God.
Yeah.
And then the other line. So I'm going off the board. I am doing nothing for a year. I'm exhausted. I'm not doing anything for a year. I've earned the right not to be a contributing member of the congregation. It's the culture, and the culture of the congregation perpetuates that. Cultures where we don't lift up leaders, we don't acknowledge them, we don't thank them, we don't recognize them, we don't pay tribute to them when they move off the board or move out of a leadership position.
Leadership.
Past leaders who talk about the benefits of serving as a leader, that almost never happens in our congregations. It's the internal environment, it's the culture that we've created that make people reluctant to step up. And again, I don't have any, wonderful quick fixes for you, except to encourage you to go back and to have those kind of conversations. What's happening in the culture of our congregation that is preventing or prohibiting or making it harder for people to step up and take a leadership role? And while all those other things that you shared are valid, if you work on the environment, I think more people will be willing to step up and take leadership roles. You work on the environment, you don't work on the person, you work on the environment that might be causing the person to act in a certain way. Bob, and then I promise we'll take a break.
Go back to that quote about, is there really a pondering? Ben hit those 3 ponders again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't want, everyone to get on this bandwagon, but we just called our first full-time minister.
Oh, congratulations.
And, yeah, young woman who is very energetic, and the excitement kind of permeates the whole community, the fellowship. And I don't think, we're here as representatives from our fellowship, but I don't think we're going to have the issues with finding the leaders in the future.
Good.
Because of, this energy that's there.
Yeah, a new minister coming in is one of the best ways to change the culture. So my recommendation is, even if you're really happy with your minister, find a way to get rid of him. Okay, thank you all for coming back. I want to move through some of the stuff fairly quickly. I don't want to rush, but I want to move through them, and I want to encourage you to continue to share, which is really good. Great, I appreciate it. And then there's a couple of exercises. I think one of them, I'm not going to say ask you to fill it out, but I'm going to go over it with you, and then, at your leisure, you can fill out the form, but you'll know what it's all about. And then I want to end with an exercise that I think you'll really enjoy, that will actually be a test to see whether or not you in this room, including me, as a worshiper, are leaders. Do you have what it takes to be a leader? So where do you find your leaders? Where do you find the leaders in your congregation? Do they drop from the sky? Do you look through the weeds?
Under a rock.
Do you pray for leaders?
Oh, yes.
And by the way, that's what I call some heavy-duty praying. Whether you agree with it or not, you've got to admit it. I really do think that in our congregations, leaders are made, not born. Even if they have a predisposition to lead, or they've led in other aspects of their lives, which, by the way, is another reason why people don't want to step up. They may be leaders in their personal lives or their professional lives, and they don't want to lead in their church. I got that. But I think that in order to really cultivate leaders in our congregations, we have to assume that we have to make them. That they're not just going to drop from the sky. They're not going to like pop out through the weeds. And certainly as Unitarian Universalists, we're not going to be able to pray for leaders to come out of nowhere. We have to cultivate them. And so I want to talk to you briefly about, Selena, you ready for this?
Yes, I am.
Servant leadership, which you addressed earlier. How many of you are familiar with servant leadership as a model? Stuart Greenleaf is the author of Servant Leadership. It's one of, when I used to do a basic leadership course, there were 4 models that I would share with the class. And this is one of the 4. And I really think it applies to our congregations. This, if you can, this is build up and equip through discipling, instructing, guiding, and providing service. Here's what Stuart Greenleaf says about servant leadership. The servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. So Greenleaf says it starts with serving, and then through service, maybe not everyone, but many people begin to aspire to something greater. They want to lead others so that they can be servant leaders and understand the joys of serving others. To me, that's cultivating leaders in our congregations. The servant leader is sharply different from one who is leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive, people who want to be in authority, or to acquire material possessions. The leader first and the servant first are 2 extreme types. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. And this is really what Unitarian Universalism is all about. The best test and most difficult to administer is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? So if we relate it to our congregation, it's almost like we are servant leaders in that we help others to serve Unitarian Universalism and other members of the congregation. And that's our primary responsibility as leaders. It changes it. It puts all of these difficult tasks in a different context, in a different light. And then he concludes, a servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. It's like he wrote this for our UU congregations. The servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. So it's delegating, it's empowering, it's nurturing, it's encouraging, it's lifting people up. That's what leaders in our congregations do, and that's how we need to sell it. And I hate to use the word sell, that's why I go like this, because that makes me say anything I want. Are you with me? Okay, so here are the 8 characteristics that I think identify good leaders. 7 didn't seem enough, 9 was like stretching it, so I came up with 8.
We only have to have 3 of them, you said?
That was the other list. You have to have all of these.
We only have 7 principles.
Yeah, that's right. I should have made it 7. Oh, I should have talked about it before. So, in no particular order. Number 1 is to know and commit to our Unitarian Universalist faith. It really means being absolutely committed to being a devout Unitarian Universalist. understanding our history, understanding what it means to be a UU, which is to serve the greater good, understanding our spiritual journey, where we are in our path to being the best UU we can be, because taking on a leadership role needs to fit with our spiritual journey. It needs to be part of our journey, or else why are we doing it? So that's number one. You stop me at any point if you want to offer some comments on these. Number two, take responsibility for decisions made and actions taken. And this is where you do separate the leaders from the followers, or the leaders from the faux leaders, because I like to use the word faux at least once whenever I do a presentation. People who pretend to be leaders but really aren't. At some point, the leader has to take responsibility for the decisions that they made or the actions that they took. If not, your congregation is dead in the water. Somebody has to take responsibility. It doesn't mean they make the decision on their own. It doesn't mean that they say, get out of the way, I'll take care of this. But somebody has, the buck stops here. Someone has to be accountable for the decision or the action. And if the person isn't willing to do it, in my book, they are not a real leader. They stay at the table, and I love that expression. A true leader stays at the table, doesn't leave, or doesn't usurp their authority because things get tough. I just want to share a quick example, Mariah, and then remind me. There's the head of the, in my congregation, this was several years ago, we had this big debate about whether or not we should apply for a line of credit. Most of the congregation wanted to do it, but there was a group of a vocal minority, including most of the members of the finance committee, who didn't want a line of credit. They were afraid it would start us on the road to ruin. And the head of the finance committee was particularly vocal about being against this. We brought it to a congregational vote. The mistake we made was we put it on the agenda like kind of late in the meeting. And right before we were about to take on this agenda item, the administrator got in front and said, people have been leaving, and if one more person leaves, we won't have a quorum, and we won't be able to vote on the next item. At that point, the head of the finance committee stood up and walked out. And so we weren't able to take a vote on it. And I had he was a friend, not anymore. No. And we, a few days later, we sat down over a cup of coffee and we talked about it. And I said, you are a recognized leader in this congregation. Leaders don't leave the table. Just because people don't agree with you, or it gets kind of hot, or you don't like the way things are going, you don't leave the table. That's not what leaders do. You have to stand there and you have to take it. And you have to be accountable. Yeah, you take on that responsibility, and if you have to, you need to be the container for somebody's anger. You don't want to, again, if it's larger than, if it becomes inappropriate, then it becomes an issue of regulations. But there are people that are going to bitch at a decision that was made. Even if it was a right decision, you're going to have a minority that aren't going to be happy. So this was your idea, you did this. I know the congregation voted for it, but I think it stinks. All right, I got it, One of my responsibilities is to be a container for people's anger. But there's a way you respond to that, which we talked
And my motto in my job is you can never please all the people.
Never,
Never please all the people.
yeah, well, you can. Absolutely.
If you do that,
Number 3.
if you please them all, you've done something wrong.
Understand and respect boundaries. So when you move into a leadership position, you now are in a different place in relation to the other members of the congregation. Where before you were peers, you're not anymore. Doesn't mean you're not friends, you don't love each other and all that, but your position has changed. And there are boundaries that leaders need to maintain. So how many of you took healthy congregations training? Just one? Well, we have to get healthy congregations training around the district. There's the concept.
Lily did it for 2 years.
Oh, that's right, you guys did that a lot.
So 20 people out of Shelter Rock have done it. It's coming up again.
Oh, good.
2015.
Good.
Excellent program.
Well, then you know the concept of self-differentiation,
Yes.
which is one of the qualities of a really great leader. In any relationship, there's a natural tension. There's the need to be close with the people, and I'll use it in the context of leadership. There's a need for leaders to be close to the people that they lead, so they can be in touch with them and maintain relationships. And then there's the need to maintain a certain distance from the people that you lead so that you can be objective, so that you can make decisions on behalf of the entire congregation. If someone is able to balance the need to be close to people with the need to be separate from people, then that person is said to be self-differentiated. If somebody gets too close to the people that they lead, then they lose their objectivity, they're swayed by all different opinions, they're wishy-washy, they don't take a stand on anything, they get their feelings hurt. On the other hand, if someone moves too far in the other direction, distances themselves from the congregation, then they're out of touch with the congregation, they sever relationships with members of the congregation. So what you want to strive for is an awareness that you need to balance your need to be in touch with the people that you lead in the congregation, but also the need to sometimes be separate from the congregation. I'm not saying any of this stuff is easy, but that's one of the things that distinguishes really good leaders from faux leaders. There, I said it again. There's self-differentiation, there you go. Emotional fusion is if you're too close, you need to be like the people that you're leading. And then extreme separateness would be emotional cutoff. So now you're battling people because you think they may be violating your turf. Number 4, give yourself permission to be vulnerable. This is Brene Brown. Has anyone read her stuff?
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she's great.
She's got a lot of TED Talks that are fantastic.
What's that?
She does TED Talks, which are fantastic.
Yeah. She's done a few of those, I think. Leaders give themselves permission to be vulnerable. They make mistakes. They lose their cool sometimes. Sometimes they handle a situation badly. The challenge in leadership is to admit your mistakes, allow yourself to be vulnerable, and then move on. Brene Brown said, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. So leaders who affect change are ones that are vulnerable and willing to put themselves out there, even if they make a mistake. Number 5, live your values. So there's an exercise that I do, that I did in my leadership training, where I asked people to imagine that the day was coming and they had to leave the congregation. So you're moving to another place, and you're moving to another part of the country, and so you have to leave your beloved congregation that you have served so faithfully for these many years. I've been talking like this the whole time, by the way, really eloquently like this. To recognize you, the congregation is going to have a giant banquet. Hundreds and thousands of people are going to come. Even if they're a smaller congregation, hundreds and thousands of people are coming to pay tribute to you. And the minister is going to deliver your legacy. Now, legacy isn't a...
No, she didn't say eulogy.
It's not a... it's not what's on your tombstone. What's that called?
Epitaph.
Epitaph, yeah. It's how you want to be remembered. But the minister is a really busy person and doesn't have time to write it. So you're being asked to write your legacy. And this is the exercise that I do with people. And I won't do it today. But I would give you about 10 minutes in about 2 or 3 sentences, no more than that, to write down how you want to be remembered. How do you want to be remembered as a member of your congregation? And then I would ask each person, then I would say, okay, the day has come and the banquet, everybody's coming and all that. And then, but the minister comes down with laryngitis. So you're going to have to deliver your legacy. And then I ask each student to stand and read what they wrote. And it can be very, very poignant. People are very eloquent in what they write. And then what I ask them to do is to look at the legacy and to identify 3 values that are embedded in the legacy. Gandhi talked about absolute values or principles that guide our conduct. So I ask people, what are your absolute values? What do you stand for personally? and ask them to look to the legacy for answers. And it can only be 3 words. And it can't be something you do, like I'm a good listener. That's what you do. What's the quality, the value instilled in you that makes you a good listener? Compassion, understanding, empathy. So I ask people to go real deep and identify those 3 values. And then I ask them to live those values. And that's what great leaders do. They discern what their values are, what they believe in, and then they live them. Okay? Feel free to do this exercise on your own or with your congregation. And if you have questions about it, call me or email me. Empower others, and we've talked about this. Bill Gates said as we look at the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. So here's what I say to congregations all the time when I hear, we can't get anybody to make the coffee, we're not getting enough pledge money to cover our costs. What I say to leaders is, it's not your problem. It's the problem of the congregation. It's not the board's problem, it's the problem of the congregation. If you can't get anybody to make coffee, it's not your problem. It's the problem of the congregation, and we need to start putting it out there. Congregation, we have a problem. And then you begin to empower others. And if no one steps forward to make coffee, we're not having coffee. You can't do that with like an annual fund drive, unfortunately. But it's not your problem. It's the problem of the congregation, and if we keep it in that context, then that enables us to continue to go out and inspire and lift up and reinforce and encourage people to get involved. And if they don't, unless it's something critical, like raising money or whatever, then we're not doing it. We can't get teachers to teach our adult religious education courses. Well, then we're not having adult religious education courses. Congregation, we've got a problem. No one's stepping up to teach the adult RE courses. Not as easy with children's religious education. So how can we solve this, congregation? And if we can't, well, we're not going to be able to have adult religious education courses this semester. Does this sound like heresy? Number 7, embody the mission of your congregation. So not only do you have to live your values, but you have to live the mission and the values of the congregation. How many of you can recite your mission statement verbatim? Or if not verbatim, at least with the exact words. So how can leaders live the mission of the congregation if we don't even know what it is? If you're interested, and I've worked with a few congregations already on this, if you're interested in having the congregation move towards a new mission statement, if your mission statement is more than 3 to 5 years old, you should be reviewing it anyway, contact me. I can give you a process to facilitate the development of a new mission statement that includes the entire congregation. But if we don't know what the mission is, then how can leaders live it? We need to embody the mission. We need to be talking about it all the time. And every decision that a leader makes needs to be made in concert with the mission of the congregation. And then number 8, the 2 things I mentioned earlier, listen well and instill trust. And I'm only going to have time to do one of these 2. So as I mentioned earlier, listening well is the greatest skill that a leader can have. I'm absolutely 100% convinced. And all of you who are leaders, except for the worshiper, am I picking on you too?
And the
If you
follower.
go back to the evaluation.
I
And the follower, right? You can make your job so much easier if you cultivate the skill of listening well, if you don't do it already. So listening well means not making assumptions about what people are going to say. It means really listening and asking open-ended questions so that you can listen further and understand what a person is saying. The biggest barrier to listening well, and I'm not going to go through how you listen well, I could, but I don't have time. The biggest barrier to listening well is we make assumptions. Here comes Siobhan again, this is going to be trouble. Already, before the person's even gotten into our space, we're already starting to make assumptions about what they're going to say or what they're going to do. So we need to drop assumptions that we make about situations. So here's a great example. I'm going to show you a scenario in a moment, and I'm going to invite you to ask closed questions, questions that can only be answered yes or no. And you'll ask them based on your assumptions. And then after a few questions, I'll invite you to ask an open-ended question. because questions are your best friend as a leader. Okay, you ready? Now, if you've heard this before, don't give it away, Andrea. Or don't ask a question that would make it obvious. A man is afraid to go home because there is a man with a mask waiting for him. So you need to figure out the scenario, but you can only ask yes or no questions initially.
Is it Halloween?
Good question. It is not Halloween.
Does the man want to rob him?
Does the man with the mask want to rob him? Nope, absolutely not.
Is there a hospital involved?
There's not a hospital involved.
Does he know this man?
Yes, he does. Good question. Interesting, interesting. Any other questions?
Is the man with a mask wanting to harm the
Nope.
person?
He does not want to harm the person. You're zeroing in on this. Hold on, Norm. You look like you know it.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay,
It's
okay.
way out, it's way
Go
out.
ahead, ask the question.
I want to make sure I'm not a blind man with an eye patch that's supposed to drive him home.
Well, you can be sure now, because that's not the scenario.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
so,
Why is he afraid?
well, no, you want to ask that, don't you? And which I'll invite you to in a moment. So you've asked about a half a dozen closed questions. Based on your assumptions, you're no closer to understanding the essence of what's happening than when we started. Now, what's an obvious open-ended question that you want to ask? And,
What is he afraid of?
or why is the man afraid to go home?
Yeah, why?
Right? He's afraid to go home because he's afraid he'll get tagged out at home plate. So it's a baseball scenario. There's a ground ball between short and third in the hole. The guy on second base rounds third, but he's afraid to try for home because if the ball beats him, he'll be tagged out. So the man with the mask is a catcher. So all needed was to drop your assumption and ask an open-ended question, an obvious question, and suddenly you see things in a different light. Asking questions, dropping assumptions, is one of the best tools that leaders have. The ability to listen well. And asking non-judgmental questions, which is something I got from my colleague Renee. So instead of, I'm trying to think of something that happened during our conversation. Oh, the blaming. So instead of saying, so you're blaming me because this went wrong. So you always have to find someone to blame? That's a judgmental question. Non-judgmental would be, so I hear that you need to blame me or someone for what went wrong. Can you tell me more about that? Or, so you're complaining about the coffee. Well, if you don't like it, you don't have to drink it. Versus, so you're complaining about the coffee. Can you tell me, can you offer some suggestions about what we can do with the coffee? It's asking a non-judgmental question that doesn't put a stamp on it on how you're feeling. It's not accusatory. You know what I mean? This is like listening 101. But we should be doing it. We should be asking open-ended questions, and we should be asking non-judgmental questions. And then we sit back and we listen. And then we'll respond based on what we heard. Here's one more exercise I want to ask you to do related to listening well. I'm going to ask you to have a debate. It's got to be real quick because we're almost out of time. So you two are going to debate, and you two, and two, and two, and two, and two, and two, and two. So turn to your partner. Now, you're only going to debate for about 30 seconds because we're really out of time. Now, I'll tell you the topic in a moment. The person sitting on the left facing in is going to take the yes position. And the person on the right is going to take the no position. The yes person will go first. You only have 30 seconds, so you got to go back and forth as many times as you can. So don't filibuster, Siobhan. Here's the most important rule. As you go back and forth, you can't respond to your partner until you first summarize what you heard your partner say. Not just the first time, but every time. You can't respond to your partner until you first summarize what you heard them say. And if your partner forgets, you have to remind them. Oh, you got to summarize first. Okay? Here's the scenario. Should men with long handlebar mustaches be allowed to eat soup in public? Time's out, time's out. I did this one time with a group of attended versus I swear I couldn't get them to stop. And they really wanted to keep the Who thought their partner did a really good job of summarizing what they said? Susan, you thought that Ann did a good job of summarizing what you said?
You actually
Ann,
summarized better than what I said.
Susan said you summarized what you said real well. If that's the case, what was it physically impossible for you to do while you were listening to Susan?
Think of anything else.
Exactly. If you're listening to summarize what a person said, you can't think of what you're going to say next, because the brain can't do two things at the same time. Now, I'm not saying that as a leader you should go around summarizing what everyone said, because someone will hurt you. And you'll violate regulations. But you listen as if you're going to summarize what the person said, and it forces you to stay in the moment. I know this is like really simple stuff, but boy, if more leaders practice these techniques, we would have more successful leaders in our congregations. Deep listening is miraculous for both listener and speaker. When someone receives us with open-hearted, non-judging, intensely interested listening, our spirits expand. We're attracted to people who listen well. And we'll support them as leaders. I'm going to give you a handout, and you can do this on your way home if you want, unless you're driving. Or sometime, you can fill this out, but let me show you this. This is from The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey Jr., not the Stephen Covey, but his son. You familiar with it? Oh, okay, with the book, The Speed of Trust. It's pretty good stuff. And he talks about the ability to trust yourself and trust others and instill trust in others. And he talks about 4 cores of credibility: integrity, which is walking your talk, having the courage to act in accordance with your values and your beliefs. He says you have to have all 4 of these cores of credibility. Our intent, our motives, our agendas, our resulting behavior. Trust grows when our motives are straightforward and based on mutual benefit, when we genuinely care not only for ourselves, but for the people we interact with, lead, or serve. So someone who's trying to be authoritarian, who's trying to exert power over others, is not a leader. They're not doing it because they're looking at the common good of the congregation, or because they want to not only benefit themselves, but they want to benefit the people that they lead. The 3rd core is capabilities, abilities that inspire confidence, so that's talents, attitudes, skills, etc. It's how we produce results. And the 4th one are the results. It's our track record, our performance, getting the right things done. If we don't do what we say we do, or what we're expected to do, it damages our credibility. So Covey says we have to exhibit all 4 of them. I could have all the skills in the world to know finances and stuff, but if I'm like a mean person when I'm interacting with other members of the congregation, or if I say, yeah, I'll get the budget done, and I never get it done, then it doesn't matter how skilled I am, it's going to impact on the ability of people to trust me. And you can take any one of these 4 and mix them around like that. Covey says we have to exercise all 4 cores of credibility to be great leaders. And then he talks about 13 behaviors for cultivating trust, and I do have this on a handout. And he puts them into 2 categories: character and competence. So the 13 behaviors are real quickly: talk straight, which means tell the truth, be impeccable with your word, demonstrate respect, our first principle. Do we really need to elaborate on that? Create transparency, be open and authentic, no secrets from the congregation. Boy, leadership would be so much easier if it wasn't clouded in this secrecy. Right wrongs, apologize, show humility, don't let pride get in the way of doing the right thing. Show loyalty, give credit freely, acknowledge the contributions of others. I'm very good at this. Mention people who aren't there and give them credit. Great leaders do that all the time. Under competence, deliver results, make things happen, be on time, get better, continuously improve. Go to training sessions, leadership day. Oh, you're already here. Confront reality, which means address the tough stuff directly. Don't skirt the issues or look the other way. Clarify expectations and practice accountability. A lot of this stuff we've talked about. Take responsibility for your actions. And then there are 3 that fall under both character and competence. Listen first. We talked about listening. Keep your commitments, a core trait of really great leaders, and extend trust to others. You may do it slowly at first, but then continue to trust others if you want to have people trust you. What Covey says, which I found really interesting, is the quickest way to decrease trust is to violate a behavior of character. Well, the quickest way to increase trust is demonstrate a behavior of competence. So I've got the handout for you, and I'm gonna give that to you, and as soon as you get it, you can take off and go to closing worship. Hey, folks, thanks very much for.
Thank you.